Hello and good afternoon. And now welcome to our last panel discussion of today. And I'm really excited to introduce you to amazing speakers, a fantastic chair, and also a very important topic which will round up what you have heard over the course of today about legal tech innovation. And now we go global. We really go global, showing you what is the global business of legal tech from a founder's perspective. And as moderator, we have chosen Brian Tang. And Brian Tang is the founding executive director for law, innovation and technology and entrepreneurship in the lab at the University of Hong Kong. And also Brian is an innovator, an educator, and also an ecosystem builder who has worked in law and technology and finance in not only in Hong Kong, but also in New York, in the Silicon Valley, and Australia for more than 2 decades. So Brian himself is a global citizen and a legal tech expert, and also has been a contributor to two of our books. So both the AI book and also the legal tech book. And I think one thing we are very proud of, Brian, is because he has been shortlisted by the Financial Times among the most innovative lawyers, and is shortlisted for the new Collaborative Innovation Award. So you've got a fantastic chair for this panel. Brian, I would love to hand over to you now to start the panel discussion.
Thank you so very much for those kind words, Suzanne. So a couple of things. Actually, in terms of the Wiley FinTech series, I've contributed 4 books, but including the FinTech and the RegTech book. So I like the Wiley series. Welcome everybody to this last session. Sometimes I called it the graveyard session, but I think I think we're hopefully going out with a bang. I think the organizers organized it really well, such that we're coming after that great overview that we heard from Helga and Gregor in relation to an overview of the legal tech landscape, especially as it relates to Europe. Now we're in some ways going down into the trenches and speaking to the founders themselves, and hearing directly from them, but also going wide in terms of hearing not just in Europe, but also in North America with Laura, and in Asia as well from myself, for those who are interested in this neck of the woods, which by the way, it's 10:50 at night right now. So sometimes I'll be reaching out for something, for a little bit of beverage to keep me going. Without further ado, I'm really honored to share the stage and to introduce you to our guest panelists here. And I think we're going to do, since it's our last session, we're going to be a little bit informal. We're going to start with some stories individually first from each of you, so that we learn a little bit more about you before we get into some more detailed questions. And please, as with the rest of the conference, I most welcome. I have my Q&A page ready on my right-hand side, looking out for your questions as they come about. So without further ado, let's kick it off with Donna Denis-Smith. So Donna, love to hear a little bit more about your background. I don't know whether in this legal tech space, other phrases like alternative legal service providers or new law, which do you like, and the like. So a general question for all of you, but starting with Donna, please. Introduce yourself. When you started your startup, what pain point were you trying to address, and what's the story that led you to be a founder of law tech startup?
Oh, thank you for having me here. I started in 2010. I came up with the idea of reverse outsourcing, repatriating work, if you like. I was very disturbed, the attrition of women from the legal profession. I qualified in one of the Magic Circle law firms and left the law. I never thought I would return as an entrepreneur. I started a completely different business in a different area. And it was this outsourcing kind of decision and coming with a fresh eye to it that made me return. I started without technology, in fact, because I wanted to, the pain I saw was around quality of work, flexibility, and also location of where the services were being provided from, but also addressing the social impact problem that we seem to have with women leaving in too high numbers. And I really started, and it was from the beginning an enterprise solution. So we were always going to work with FTSE companies. That was my background. I knew it from my practice days. And so I wanted to kind of, if you like, get under the bonnet of how these organizations worked before I built something they would reject. So, but also I couldn't fundraise. I tried to get some angel funding, but I was pregnant and nobody backed me. So I then decided that I would back myself by creating my own seed capital by selling a few services to clients, and that's basically what we did. So we ran, if you like, foundation stage for about 3 years until I managed to gather the funds, and then we started building in 2015 a legal marketplace platform for enterprise clients. So that's really flexible resourcing was, and people really, and culture in the legal professions, something I'm really passionate about, and make it inclusive.
Awesome. So, and maybe it's the way you position yourself, but so it's flexible resourcing, but I think you described it as a enterprise marketplace. So it's a different from a placement kind of recruitment model. Do people actually kind of place on the marketplace and you don't intermediate except for providing the platform?
It's curated precisely because it is an enterprise solution. It's very difficult to sell to enterprise in a non-intermediated way, primarily because there are relationships and key accounts management techniques that you need to have in place. Otherwise, you don't get very far and not very deep. So it's really learning for the manual process that I've understood what needed to be automated, what touch points made a difference, and what created work. And from my point of view, I always wanted to get to the point where for the least trouble and the least effort, the in-house team would get access to the right type of resource, whether it's one individual or a bunch of skills. The more we can break it down, the more we can be relevant and actually be efficient and flexible. And so it's a kind of a combination of getting to the perfect match. I remember one of my first presentations, I think it was years back, maybe 2014 or something, was about, online dating, or we can learn from it in the legal profession. I think I called it "What's Love Got to Do with It?" But obviously not much when you talk about law and love. Maybe not that time. So I was really interested in how can you get something that can stick and work very well and be a win-win really, and actually win-win-win, because the lawyer has to win, we have to win, and the client has to win.
Awesome. And before going on to our next panelist, is there a particular phrase that you prefer? So is it like there's law tech, legal tech, but there's also ALSPs or new law? Do you personally have a preference?
I have a preference for none, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I think tech is tech, and it's tech that happens to be servicing a particular vertical, but it needs to work with the existing tech anyway. So the idea that we go with a legal tech solution and somehow it's magically very different when it doesn't actually plug into everything that exists in enterprise, I'm not sure it helps. So I've actually stayed away from all labels. Take me, as an anti-label person. I'm not sure there's much in a name. The only thing that, and I think the only
unless you want to fundraise.
Well, yes, I mean that's for another session maybe. I think the law firms actually win from this labeling of us in different ways because it creates a very kind of atomized landscape where actually the biggest kind of players are the incumbents. And so I don't think it's been a very helpful to try to categorize ourselves. We are providers of solutions, and we happen to use some technology to do that.
Awesome. Lots of things to unpack there, but and we'll certainly get to that. Next off, I'd love to hear from you, Laura. Laura Wyngaarden. Yes, hopefully I haven't mucked that up too much.
Not too bad, Brian.
Thanks so very much. So Laura, also very international. Dana was from lots of different places before she settled in, like I have been, and Laura yourself too. And now I believe you find yourself in Canada, where again, very much tech. I mean, talk about it's ML focused. Love to hear your story again. How long has Dilgen been around, and what were the pain points you were trying to achieve, and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started back in 2015 now, and the original impetus behind building the technology we built, which is machine learning contract analysis software. So we help people who need to review contracts, lawyers at law firms or ALSPs or elsewhere, find the key information in those documents. And we do that using machine learning. And so the original impetus behind starting the company, or it didn't start out as a company, it started out as solving a problem that we had. Was me and my co-founder, Conrad Proler, who was a corporate associate at Baker McKenzie in Toronto at the time. He was spending an enormous amount of time, working on M&A due diligence, just trawling through hundreds of documents, often late at night, weekends. And if you're familiar with that kind of work, it can be very manual and not the most exciting, let's say. Looking for key information, change of control language, assignment language in those documents. And at the time, we were looking around and seeing the way that machine learning was starting to be used in other fields, and it just started as a question mark. There must be a better way to do this other than just going at this manually. What if we tried to build it? Could it be done? And so that was the question that started. We started out going down this road, and of course, as everyone else does, starting initially with a simple version, iterating, and now, of course, we've expanded far beyond that original use case, which is M&A due diligence, to a wide variety of contract review work, and working with. We now work with law firms and accounting firms, with financial institutions, governments, ALSPs all around the world. So. That's the journey that we've been on.
Fantastic. Well, so my background, I used to be an IPO lawyer in M&A. So, and even whenever I felt sorry for myself, then I saw my litigation friends and I said, okay, you have discovery. And then this was before the days when, there's lots more e-discovery than there is now. But no, so in terms of your business model, presumably you started with certain kinds of contracts or certain kind of use cases. So what is the current weighting in terms of your client base? So do you have something, is it more kind of off the shelf? There's something that's pre-trained that clients can more readily use for that particular kind of contract? Or do you then go through a mini consulting aspect whereby you train using the client's kind of bespoke requirements, and then and then they use it for their purposes?
Yeah, good question. Both. So we've got off the shelf, we've got hundreds of provisions that our system can identify out of the box in about a dozen different languages. And so a client coming in with a fairly standard use case, so perhaps they're wanting to do M&A review or lease review, or they're wanting to, a COVID example, force majeure review, that became suddenly overnight something that people were very interested in. Or you're doing LIBOR review, we've got a range of different use cases, privacy use cases that we cover really well out of the box. And then if you come in with something that is more custom, more specialized to an area of work that you do, if we don't have something for that already, either you can use our system, train it to recognize new types of provisions, and that's very easy and straightforward, or we can help you. So either way. So there's a lot of customizability if that's sort of required. And there's also a lot of out-of-the-box functionality depending on what you need.
And so right now, the way you're staffed, you can help do the customization. You're not working with a big four or some integrator to kind of do that kind of integration work. We tend to do it. Sometimes our clients do that as well. So we work with, for example, LSPs who might have the skills internally to do that customization, and we might be working with one of their clients, and so it's us and the LSP and their client, and that could be done by us or our LSP partner. So it just depends on the use case. Okay, no, I've spoken to some tech startups, in the law tech and reg tech space, where they say, look, we're a technology company. We don't have the people power to do all of that, consulting related stuff. And so they've had to strategically think about whether they grow internally or they partner, or, they try to push it onto the client to do. Have you had to think through that?
Yeah, I think we find that in different circumstances, depending on the client, the use case, it could be any of those three. And so we have the internal capability to do that ourselves if it's the best choice, or we'll enable the client, particularly that tends to be, that's either the end client, or if we're working with an LSP partner, it could be the LSP. We also have the capability to train teams to do this if they prefer to do it themselves. So for us, we don't mind. We can go whatever direction makes sense for the client.
Okay. And so Dana was in private practice, and I think I seem to recall you're not a lawyer, although your co-founder is. Is that right, Laura?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were directing it to Dana. No. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So you came from the business side, right?
That's right. Yes. So we're a team that has, the different capabilities within the different team members, and we found that works really well. Awesome.
Which is a nice transaction to Paul Massey, who set up Table. So Paul was a GC. So he was one of those in the statistics that we saw earlier on that came from the law. But like a lot of us that come from the law, we see all the problems, all the things that could be done better. So I'd love to hear your story, Paul.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. So yeah, I always wanted to work in the internet sector from the early 2000s, and kind of rather fell into being a lawyer because I wasn't quite sure what else to do while I was at university, to be frank. So I think wanting to work in the internet and tech sector was kind of first. Being a lawyer was the kind of route. So I ended up finding that the more interesting work really at the real the industry level for in-house, unless you wanted to do basically pretty hardcore patent litigation or outsourcing work, was to go in-house. So I ended up at eBay for quite a long time. So experienced working at one of the, I assume one of the bigger in-house legal teams globally. They've got about 400 lawyers globally when I was there. And all the systems that they were grappling with at that point. And then jumped to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, if you like, as a GC at a UK crowdfunding platform. And I guess in terms of my founder journey, I was throughout most of my legal career kind of running little startup-y side projects, either social enterprises or internet initiatives in legal or mainly non-legal, actually. Some GovTech, for example. And so I kind of was looking for the right startup to do, I think, and being at a crowdfunding platform really helped. We were helping lots of entrepreneurs to raise finance. The company I was at was Crowdcube, which is one of the leading equity crowdfunding platform in the UK and potentially globally, actually. So raising money for the likes of Revolut, Monzo, and others. Advising hundreds of entrepreneurs about how to do this, and I was just lucky enough to get a lot of exposure to investors in that startup world, to actually find a route to do my own. So yeah, it was partly just spotting the problems of being a lawyer, and frankly, actually not even being a lawyer. It's more just identifying that lawyers weren't always didn't always have visibility of what they're doing. They didn't have visibility of the data that they're actually generating and that they're producing for the business. They're kind of going from task to task to task rather than thinking strategically, and actually the business then can get a bit fed up with those legal teams. So it was identifying those sorts of problems and really just hacking together solutions in an in-house environment to fix that, and then be able to formalize that into a startup through an investment incubator that I got to know towards the end of my time at Crowdcube, called Founders Factory, which is a sector agnostic incubator in London that invests in talent, really, and then you are able to build your startup, find your tech talent to partner with, and go out to market. So that was kind of massively helpful, really. And yeah, the startup we built is called Tabled. It's really a reaction to probably to too many law firm portals, and trying to do something that works for the whole market, really. Law firm portals, the feedback we got from the in-house community was that they weren't really working for them. And we wanted to do something that works for the law firms, but also, very importantly, work for the in-house teams as well. So we started out with this idea of a front door to the legal team, something that we could build relatively easily. And we've just scaled up from there into essentially a workflow and case management system that really connects in-house lawyers and their law firms, and allows law firms to manage multiple clients through the system as well. So it's really a bit of an ecosystem that we're starting to create that reflects the way that lawyers work in a very stakeholder-driven way, because your primary stakeholder is your client, but then you've got your team, you've got your external legal players. So it's kind of bringing all of those stakeholders together into one place, but letting the lawyers drive it and extract a lot of data from that. So actually what we're really trying to do is make lawyers the hub of data in their organizations, because obviously you see so much work coming through a legal team or a law firm team.
Great. The start of your story resonated with me in the sense that I was in private practice in New York, and then I was meant to come back to Asia as a mid-level associate, and they said, Brian, why don't you help us set up the Palo Alto office? And this was during the dot-com boom. So that's when I learned to embrace technology. But we pushed out 4 of the last IPOs, and then the market went like this. And then all my friends ended up, I said, well, if I stayed on the West Coast, I'd be a litigator or a restructuring lawyer. And so I said, no, I'm going to go back to New York. But I loved, I looked at your site a little bit, and I loved your story there as well. But so is your main client the in-house, or is it the law firm?
Right now it is in-house, but we're actually starting to onboard all sorts of different organizations, actually, from public sector to the education sector to now starting to onboard law firms more rapidly as well. Actually, you've got to start somewhere. Obviously, we're a couple of years in now, which I think in the legal tech world is not a long time. Actually, you've got to give these things a bit of time to get going, particularly when a pandemic interrupts. But I think we'll be talking about that in a minute, probably.
Absolutely. So is it kind of like a triage tool for the in-house, both in terms of managing the outside relationships, but also internally? Is that what the table?
Yeah, exactly. So. Exactly. So you can, in the buzzword, in a no-code way, you can build your front door to your legal team and workflows spinning out beyond that. So that might involve triage internally. You can see all the capacity of your team. It might involve triage externally. It might involve comparing budgets with, or comparing quotes from law firms, which you can do on the platform as well. And we were actually doing quite a lot of machine learning as well in terms of recommending the right lawyer to work on the work. We still do have a recommender engine actually built into the system, but we're actually looking more now at partnering with other machine learning providers if clients want that within their workflow. So if they want to categorize work coming in, for example, or extract entity data from contracts as part of a workflow, we're partnering with machine learning providers on that. So yeah, it's really triage, workflow, and resource allocation of management.
Great to know. So I've previously described COVID as a tale of two cities. I think some law techs and reg techs have done really well because the anecdotal evidence is acceleration of legal departments and the transformation of and embracing of technology. But on the other hand, it also has meant the allocation of resources towards certain things. Does Zoom count as legal tech? E-signatures, yes. Everybody need to do that. And then of course there's contract management, right, and documentation. But other areas have suffered a little bit more because of deprioritization. So generally speaking, how has COVID been for all of you? So maybe going backwards, Paul, how's it been with you?
Yeah,
net
so
good,
a mix, really.
unbalanced, yeah, negative.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's been a mix. I mean, we went into COVID just about to close a fundraise, and the investors all put their head in the sand. So we really had to go back to first principles of what we were doing, which is part of the reason why we backed off machine learning, frankly, because it takes so much investment to do it well. So in some respects, it was good because it really made us focus. And our tools used a lot for managing remote teams and remote work. And we just saw our metrics going up and up and up throughout the whole of last year. Although we weren't doing any marketing or really, we didn't do the sort of, get a freebie during lockdown. We just didn't think that was actually very productive for most legal teams we were working with. We just saw our existing clients using the platform more and more and more. So we were able to quite easily actually go back to investors then as things woke up a little bit later in the year and show them the metrics and then close a fundraise. And, have been able to scale up from there and build the team out. So I think, on the whole, we've been relatively lucky, I think.
So you did close at the end?
Yeah.
The fundraise, you did close it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Awesome. What about you, Laura?
Took a bit longer than I wanted. It's because of COVID, but yeah, we got there in the end.
Awesome. And yourself, Laura, in some ways, initially there were less deals, but in some ways, as long as it's digitized, they could still do the deals because it's all being reviewed remotely.
Right. I think aside from the first few weeks when everyone was in, shock and just trying to cope with the fact that everything needed to be done from home now, and we saw law firms trying to get the technology in place to facilitate that, and that became the priority. I think aside from that, that initial period, we saw, continued to see strong adoption. Technology is still very much is a priority, and perhaps some things even more priority. Paul, you had mentioned some of your capability to facilitate remote teams in working, and we have some of that as well in terms of project management capability to help people assign out contracts to review, check if they've been reviewed, see the status of it. And that was initially built for people who were in different offices around the world, coordinating across time zones, but was of course very helpful once everyone was separate, sitting at home. That was a feature that was certainly very helpful. And then of course we saw new use cases as M&A got a little bit quiet at the beginning of last year, and we saw a little bit less activity there. There was other use cases like force majeure review, which suddenly is not something that you see most of the time, but suddenly became very, something that people were very interested in doing. And other use cases as well, like LIBOR remediation, which of course has been one of the big focuses for us as well, given the changes coming into effect. So it's continued to be, I think on average, we've seen more adoption than prior to COVID. Great to hear.
What about you, Donna? I mean, being in flexible labor in a sense, right? Talk about labor being disrupted completely because of COVID. So has it net been good, even not so good for you?
Well, I'd say that, everybody feels bad when they say they had a good pandemic. So I do feel bad saying that, but that is the truth. So I have to say it, but I feel bad saying it. We were specializing in remote workers. That was what we always went on about. Until the pandemic, nobody believed that could be possibly a productive way to work. So if you like, one of the barriers to my business, we have over 2,000 lawyers on the platform now, was push the work home, and that went away with the pandemic. So we were able to just allow people to really keep working in this different way, which is the new way. But I guess the other thing that we did, because as I said, we built I bootstrapped, so I built the tech through our own profits. And there's only so much runway, and Paul touched on how it works when you need to fundraise and you're trying to bring tools that are expensive and everything. So if you like, one of the highlights was the fact we got an Innovate UK grant to build out the technology, and that was a great kind of, trust stamp from the government, I guess, because we hadn't been seen in any of the kind of labels of tech or legal of any nature. And it was really great to be able to be validated through these pretty strenuous application process, that we had a product that was relevant for the post-pandemic world. So I've spent most of the past 9 months out of the last kind of 12, 13 really focused on that technology platform that we've built. It's quite an intense process, but really, really exciting. And finally, we're able to apply everything we've learned from being really close to the clients, and hopefully, we can show the market later in this year what we've done with this government grant. So it's been, I can't deny it, really hard as a leader, really, really hard to keep the team together, to make sure everybody's in a good place. And if you like, that's been my main preoccupation, to feel that people are healthy and they don't have a, collapse. But in terms of the business, we've performed, it's been the highest revenue year to date in the history of the business. And I guess because we've been ready for 10 years for remote work. And this year has started, at a pace. People always say it's like a Ferrari, like, whenever it's going at 200 kilometers an hour, it's like, and it's actually going at 300 kilometers an hour. So it's really pacey, but it's really good fun. So, this is the kind of moments where you kind of you enjoy being an entrepreneur, the really, really high highs and then the really low lows. But we'll talk about that I'm sure in a bit some more.
I'm sure. And actually, yes, I think you opened up by saying you opened up in 2010. So I think entrepreneur is the right thing. So sometimes we use the word startup, and for myself, even it's like, when do you stop being a startup? Right? So how big is your team, Donna?
So my central team is not very big. It's about 15.
Okay.
But because of the tech, we're pretty efficient.
So again, I'm just trying to conceptualize so
the
audience can understand how big you all are. And sometimes people are pleasantly surprised how big or some small, whatever they think in their minds. Laura, what about yourself? What's your core team?
Similar to Donna. Was it similar?
Mm-hmm. And Paul, yourself? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Sorry, I think I disconnected there. Hopefully you caught that.
No, go ahead again, please.
Okay, so my comment there was similar to Dana, similar size, where as a software company, you can be very efficient, which is fantastic, and you can operate, you can operate as efficiently with a smaller team. So
what percentage at this stage is R&D versus kind of sales? And
I think, like most companies, that's shifted over time. And initially, we were very R&D heavy. Over time, once you've got your core product built, and you are still continuing to develop and you're adding new features, but it's less of an all-consuming, we're just building, we're not selling. Now it's focusing more on client support and having more team members that are facilitating clients who are doing more complex projects and are needing kind of a bit more of that consulting type input. That's become more of a focus for us recently.
And customer success people, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's becomes important. The tech is of course important as well, continuing to develop, but that becomes a big focus.
Indeed. Paul, what about yourself?
So we are 7 right now and growing. And yeah, the biggest team is our tech team, basically. So we've got 4 engineers. I still do all the product management. And I do, you see startups raising capital and then building a team of, 20 people very quickly. I do think it's important to stay nimble. So that's our current approach anyway. But we're just, as you win more clients, you have more tech needs. The case management world has a lot of feature requirements. So yeah, there's certainly demand for engineering resource for us.
Indeed. So I seem to recall, and we did discuss this a little bit beforehand, incubators and accelerators. So one of the things I lament in Hong Kong, we don't actually have any, and that's always been my dream to kind of start something up. And then COVID happened, so there are other things that came to mind. But I think, Paul, you mentioned you grew up from an accelerator, and then you went on to a law firm accelerator. And Laura, you were with an accelerator as well. But Donna, I don't think you were at all beforehand. So for you, Paul, and Laura, maybe you can speak a little bit about that accelerator experience. And so for other would-be kind of entrepreneurs out there, what would you recommend in terms of pros and cons of the accelerators and how to choose between them? Because I think you guys in London, you're so lucky that there's so many, and I think the same in Canada as well. I mean, here we have lots. They're just none that are legally focused. But Paul, I think yours was not legally focused, the first one, right?
No, not at all. It was lots of different sectors. So friends of mine who were at the, in the incubator at the same time as me are doing property technology, doing sort of visual synthetic media. So I've got quite a nice cohort of other entrepreneurs that I speak to a lot, and we help each other out and stuff. So I think that's one of the big benefits of these environments is you're all mucking in together, doing different things, and you can learn from each other. It depends massively, doesn't it? Because they take different shapes and sizes. Founders Factory is quite well known. The big global, the number one is probably Y Combinator in the US, which quite a few legal tech startups have come through. If you get backing from one of these, then you get a fair bit of capital, and you've got a good opportunity to really build your product, find good tech talent to work with. And they're really focused on building those startups and rapid iteration to get to market, versus, I guess, the law firm incubators or other legal service providers, accelerators have different priorities. There's different different designs of these things, so you have to really read the small print and know what you're applying to. But I think there's such a support network now for starting companies. It's basically a career path to be an entrepreneur in a way that it just wasn't 20 years ago. Obviously people were doing it, but there was not the same sort of milk round process of starting a company that there is now. The framework is there for you to do it. So if you've got a half decent idea, you've got no excuse not to give it a go basically anymore, because the support is there. I haven't paid for office space, for servers, for I've had probably £30,000 worth of credit from Amazon Web Services through the incubators I've been involved with. So all those sorts of things really help for a startup. But they can also be a drain on your time. You're speaking to hundreds of mentors who you should probably be mentoring yourself, because you're not always getting much value from them. So it can be quite a drain on your time as well. So I think choose them carefully.
And were the ones that you were involved in, did they take equity?
So Founders Factory invest quite a bit of seed capital, so they take a stake. The law firm ones I've been involved with haven't done that to the same extent. It's been more of a collaborative environment.
Awesome, thank you. Laura, what has your experience been?
I think we were pretty lucky in terms of when and where we were starting our company. We were pretty spoiled for choice in terms of incubators. We actually belonged to 3 in the early days, sort of 2015, 2016, where, if you remember, there were incubators popping up everywhere. And where we were in downtown Toronto, within 10 minutes walk, there was the 3 incubators that we belonged to, 2 of which were legally focused. So that was the Legal Innovation Zone and LEGALTECH out of Mars. And then the Creative Destruction Lab, which was not legally focused, so it wasn't just for legal tech companies, but sort of focused on newer technologies like machine learning and quantum computing, space tech now, I think. So it was quite an interesting collection of companies in there. And with the Creative Destruction Lab, I was quite impressed with the caliber of the mentors that they brought in. They sort of would fly people who built products that are sort of household names. They'd fly them in. Everyone would come to Toronto. They'd gather over the program. And I thought that was fantastic and very helpful. And the Legal Innovation Zone, which is just focused on just legal tech companies, was also absolutely fantastic in terms of the community that they built. So we were in there with other legal tech companies who were starting out, and we've definitely, that sense of community that we developed there, we've stayed in touch with those companies. We talked to the founders, bounce ideas off each other. And I think we were just really lucky in terms of time and place to have a lot of support all around us, and we're sort of spoiled for choice in terms of the quality and quantity of incubators in our environment.
And I think that can make a big difference. And so I think you're quite blessed in that way. So when we were chatting as well, we talked a little bit about fundraising amongst ourselves, and it seems like, but I think Dana, you said you're bootstrapped, right? Laurie, are you bootstrapped as well, or have you received some funding?
No, we didn't go and raise external capital. So we also fortunately found like there were lots of opportunities to do that, but we felt we could kind of get to profitability, Donna, just like you, without going down that road. So that's what we chose.
Okay, good. And Paul's momentarily off, but we'll come back to him. But Donna, I think when we were talking about fundraising, one of the issues that is relatively well known is the difficulty of women founders to get to raise funds. Would you want to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I carried out some research in this space primarily because I didn't have to depend on fundraising, and I felt I could get candid reports from founders that maybe sometimes they couldn't make public because they were, running short on their runways. And really, my research found that I published it in March last year. So it was really early, just before the pandemic, and less than 1% of all the the funds that went into the legal tech space went to female founders. So if you're one female founder or a bunch of female founders, basically you're looking at 1% of capital coming into investing. It's improved slightly, but not as much as you would think, because I've been tracking this throughout the pandemic. And it's very, very, I mean, we haven't had, to my knowledge, any women founders that have gotten beyond this Series A. I've not seen any woman that raised more than 10 million, for example. Maybe Julia, who has done a couple of rounds, but under different kind of companies, if you accumulate the 2 rounds. But it's I know legal tech is quite new in a way, but the scalability of these women does depend on being backed. And some of the kind of comments they've been reporting, the questions they get asked, the pushbacks around how could you possibly compete in this crowded space, very discouraging, really. So I was happy to be able to look into it and give them a voice, if you like, when they felt they couldn't speak for themselves. And hopefully that was helpful. And I'm hoping the market will see a shift, because I think there's some really exciting companies owned by women that need to scale up, because that's, to me, it's great to talk about, starting up and the early years, but the early years are the easy years in a way, because that's when your clients aren't screaming at you, because you can, until you've got a lot of traction, and you're losing control almost, that's when it gets difficult. And how do you put the structure, and all of that costs money, having more maturity in a business is when you need to scale up. Without funding, that could be where you get to pinch point. So we're not seeing so many, many more women are maybe starting now, but they're not scaling because the funding isn't there for them. And that's an interesting transition I'm looking into at the moment.
alas, it's a statistic that we see across the startup ecosystem. It's not just legal tech. So hopefully that's something that can and will change, because dare I say it, as there are more funds that are dedicated more towards women, or one of the things I want to say, even on the angel side, if they're well-to-do law partners, right, that are willing to back. So let's hopefully hope that we can all work together and kind of address that systemic kind of issue.
Well, we are below the average. Legal is below 1%, whereas the kind of numbers around the world are 2.5 to 3. So legal is definitely lagging. I mean, I know we're a conservative sector, but it's showing even in fundraising.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, I think even the report out of Australia had diversity as one of their aspects. So hopefully we'll track that longitudinally, but more importantly, let's see what we can do about it. Want to turn a little bit now to AI. So I think Paul had touched upon this when he said, trying to build on AI and then prioritizing, because it takes a lot of time and effort to kind of do it right. I think, Donna, you're working on AI, but right now it's more for internal purposes and it's not maybe external facing. But Laura, you're front and center ML AI. And I think with that, again, in my work with RegTech and Law Tech, it's sometimes I've once even met some founders. I mean, it can't be in your circumstance, but some founders say, yeah, we actually do use it, but we don't tell people we use it. Because when you start mentioning it now, you get extra questions, right? So in terms of, bias, algorithmic bias issues, data privacy issues and the like. So maybe you can share with us, and maybe yours is less of an issue because you're really using only their clients are using their own data. You're not actually, but there's still a training aspect, there's a reliability aspect, and the accuracy aspect. So maybe how do you market AI these days, Laura?
I think what's very interesting is the way that conversation has evolved, and it's evolved very rapidly over the last few years. So if you go back 5-6 years, you got a lot more polarization in terms of the way that clients would talk about AI, the way that they thought about it. If you said you were using a machine learning tool to do some work, you'd get people typically clustering in two camps, which were polar opposites. The one would be, we think AI can do anything. It's kind of more like general intelligence. It can, if you have any machine learning, it can sort of do all of these tasks, and thinking that it can do more than it can do. And on the opposite side, you've got people thinking it can do less than it can do. So you'd hear things like machine learning is not ready. These tools aren't ready yet. They can't produce meaningful work. It's all hype. And so you'd have people at opposite ends of the spectrum with sort of quite strong convictions around those things. And whereas the reality was and is somewhere in the middle, where it's you've got tools like ours which are incredibly good at a very specific task. So if you're using the right tool for the right task, you can get big efficiency gains. Outside of that, you're not going to be applying it to other types of tasks, and the tools are getting better all the time. So that's the reality. And what we've seen over the last few years is firms, particularly the larger firms, getting really quite sophisticated about what tools can do. You're having much more nuanced conversations about how this type of software functions. And so that's been very interesting to watch that evolution. And it's depending on who you're speaking to and what type of company they're in, you can see people at different points along that evolution. So that's been very interesting. For us, completely right, we use public data if we're training machine learning models that are going out to everyone. For specific clients, if we're training just for them, we're using only their data, and their data stays on their system. So it really, from that point of view, isn't a concern that we've had to deal with.
So how do you address the question on accuracy? And do you normally, people want statistics, it's 90%, it's 97%, it's 99.9%. Right. How do you answer some of that? When we all know we have the junior associate at 3 a.m, can't keep their eyes open anyway kind of issue, right?
Right. I think as people, we all like to believe that we are absolutely perfect with our review, and that's the gold standard against which machines should be measuring up. I think what we tend to do is recommend that if clients want to prove out the accuracy to themselves, to build support for bringing the tool internally, to try it out and to measure it against, for example, a historical M&A deal where the work has been done manually and then you do it with the system. And that's the way to have the system earn your trust, just like anything else would. When you can see it found what you were looking for, possibly it found something that wasn't found initially, which can be an issue, or it can satisfy people as to reliability that way. So it's once people start testing it out, I think that's where, if they started out concerned about accuracy, that's where that tends to resolve.
Great. No, great answers. Now, I think we have less than 10 minutes. We don't have any questions as yet. So either we're engaging everyone already, or they're all nodding off, like I am. But so I wanted to. I had a few more to go around. One is that so none of you are technologists per se. So would you? How critical is it? So do you have a CTO, a technologist, as your co-founder, and how important is it for you all in your organizations? Do you feel? Maybe we'll start with you, Paul, before you disappear again.
Yeah, sure. So part of the reason I joined an incubator was I spent at least 10 years of my career trying to find good technical co-founders to run ideas that I'd come up with, and struggling. It's not easy to find somebody when you're on no budget, and getting that person really, really committed. Which is maybe part of the reason some of the biggest startups spin straight out of university when people have these connections and they don't need to spend much money on life, I guess. I'm sure that's one of many reasons. But yeah, so the incubator was amazing in that respect because I had budget and I had a very good, helpful resource to help find the right talent about the team. I mean, sorry, my internet's not very well. You need different technology partners and the talent as you go through a startup and scale up journey. When you start out, you might need frankly really scrappy developers who can build stuff fast, but it might not be the code you end up keeping for the rest of your time, but it gets you the first customers, and then you scale up with much more infrastructure and architecture that you need more sophisticated people. But you end up at the level where you're looking for CTOs who are potentially getting paid by Google or Amazon. So it's hard to find the right talent. But I think actually it's just building up your talent and managing your developers really closely and working with them and giving them what they need, making them part of the roadmap discussion is super important, so that they're a happy development team, which is, I've worked at many tech companies where the turnover of technology staff has been very, very rapid. It's hard to have a great tech team. So
your dev team, is your dev team with you? I know some people do the outsource model, but so you've got your dev team with you.
Yeah, no, they're all in-house. They're all in-house. We've got some overflow capacity if we need it, but we're building an in-house tech team.
Awesome. Laura, but what about yourself? Yours is
and all in the same place, all in person as well, actually.
Sorry, say again?
All right. Well, although we've been remote, obviously, for the last year, we also recognise it is really important to get people together in person. So we will stay flexible, but we will always have like a place where the team can get together. I just think that's so important.
Agreed. Laura, as I said, yours is really hardcore tech. So thoughts on the CTO and tech partner?
Yeah, absolutely essential if you're building this type of company. And my co-founder is technically brilliant, fortunately, because I'm not the technical person for sure, and he manages the the technical team, working both on the machine learning side, front end, back end, etc. So that's been great, and I think difficult to go down the road of building tech out if you don't have that capability on the founding team, for sure.
Right. And what about you, Donna?
So I distinguish between being a coder and being somebody who's, a technologist. I think there's slightly different skills. I read, so I have a, scientific background, mini scientific background, I guess. So, I was very into further maths when I was, a student, and philosophy. And I find the combination of the two is really helpful, because I do have a CIO and I've got a product person in-house, because I need them to understand what I'm trying to do. And I didn't have them from the beginning. I don't have a co-founder. I started by myself. And I changed some of the ingredients, if you like, because I think it's about, to me, coding is a kind of language. It's a way of thinking logically about instructions. And that is actually can play to the strength of a lawyer if you want to deploy that particular strength. But to me, it's that process of thinking. And I'm really interested in structures. And so I don't feel that I have to be a coder to be able to run a tech business. I do feel that it's important to be passionate and really genuinely interested in the underlying, what is technology. And I find actually from that point of view, philosophy, especially around AI, is a really helpful way to think. Obviously, it's got the logical side, but also the kind of ethical side. So I feel that although I wasn't kind of priming myself to become a, player in the tech world, all of kind of my childhood and my fixation on further maths and all the kind of things I did in the past suddenly caught up with me. A kind of different accelerator, can I say, just the past catching up with your future. And it's extraordinary how helpful those skills are in terms of also picking the right people for the right stage of the business, because they do change and you do need to ship people out. But the coding, if you like, and the programming is the least of my concerns. It's more the kind of strategic thinking, the roadmap, and how you take the product and how close you are to the clients from that point of view. What are you building? And then getting people to do it for you. It's, if you like, I found relatively easy.
Okay, good. Well, that's funny. I was a philosophy minor, and Laura is smiling, so I don't know whether maybe she did philosophy as well. But so maybe that's something in common there. We do have a question from Martin, which is a little bit philosophical. So what is the one thing you would do differently if you were starting again, and what would you do the same? So who wants to go first on that? And it won't be Paul.
Yeah, I'm
Donna,
happy to start. Yeah, I think I would still start with the client first and getting close to them and trying to get in and sell something. But I would definitely start with fundraising. I would definitely start with a bigger team. It's really, really hard, and you get in your own way in terms of scale. And actually, when you scale, then it gets really hard if you don't have enough people and you fill every single box on your org chart for too long. So I would definitely start with more capital, but I would still be close to the clients.
Okay, like that a lot. Laura?
I think we pretty much did the same thing, but we could do it much faster if we were to start from the beginning, because particularly when you're building tech and you're building it iteratively and you're trying, there's different ways that we could accomplish this. Let's try each of the different ways so that we can find the best way. It would cut out all that experimentation. So that'd be great. We could definitely take some years off the, getting from zero to this point if we were to do it again. But I think we'd keep it the actual path much the same.
So nothing different?
I'm sure there are things. I think it would be so much fun to do it faster. But
to Dana's point, is it, if you have more money, could you do it faster? Is that what will help you do it faster, rather than on hindsight, kind of, lesson learned?
I don't think I wouldn't go back and raise instead of not. I think we that was a decision point that we had to make at every step of the way. We had sort of clients and partners that came in and made offers to invest, and we had VCs, and every point we looked at it and decided which path we were going down and kind of consciously chose to keep going. And I think we'd do the same thing again. But it would just, if you're building a technology that you already have the map for, you can get it done much faster. then sort of having to invent each piece is obviously...
Time machine, that's what you wanted, a time
exactly.
machine.
Time machine would be a lot of fun.
Paul, we were going to the question that Martin had raised. So if there's one thing you would do differently, what would you, when you were starting out, what would it be? What would you say?
Sorry, my internet keeps cutting out
okay.
here, and I think I'm going to blame the weather. It's hard. I don't know. I mean, looking at the fundraising side again, I know it's very hard for people to raise funds. I spent a lot of time trying to fundraise, probably for the wrong amounts, before we had the right metrics and traction, because I believed in what we were doing and I wanted a big budget. And I probably had 100 investor conversations. And I know that it's hard for women and others to raise money, but it's definitely hard for everyone to raise money if you're not in the sweet spot. So I think I would probably actually have raised less and just done it really quickly and hit more milestones to build up. But at the same time, I don't look back on that with regret, because I've met a lot of investors who were very interested, genuinely, who I'm now in touch with. But at the same time, we were too early at that point. So I think entrepreneurs need to just be good at calibrating where they are in the investor market. And it's obviously possible, because you see companies across Europe in the legal space. It's not hard. It's not easy in the legal tech space either, actually, I think. There's a 5 to 10 year legacy of VC investments in legal tech that, the VCs know that it's not an easy market to crack. And they've got a bit of, sort of historical bias there that makes it hard for them to make a leap at an early stage. They need to see a lot of metrics. That's not true of everyone. Everyone's in a different position, but that would be me, is try and raise less more often, probably.
Awesome. I think I'd be somewhere between you and Donna, because I started bootstrapping as well. But then it's that product market fit aspect. But then in retrospect, if I had fundraised or gotten something more and you grew the team faster, you could actually try further. So, but welcome to the journey of, and I joke to my old corporate friends, the favorite word of a lot of startups is the word pivot, right? We're going to change. We're going to be agile. And with that, we are at the end of our time. Thank you also very much for joining us on this great panel. I enjoyed it a lot, and I learned a lot. Over to you, Suzanne.
Fantastic, Brian. Thank you so much for moderating this great panel. And thank you to Donna, to Laura, and to Paul for being our speakers today. And I must say, all of you are authors of our book. So I just want to share again, with everybody here. So all of you have written an article, a chapter in this book. So you can read Donna, Laura's, Paul's, and Brian's insight when you look at the book as well. So thank you very much for being our co-authors as well. And it was a fantastic way of ending now the official part of the LegalTech Innovation Conference to really learn from you as CEOs and COOs of great legal tech companies, how you've done it.